Hello, my name is Nikola Porshov and I am from 11th class B, System Programming, time number 18, and this is my presentation about exception handling in Java. In this presentation we will go through certain topics including introduction to exceptions in Java, errors and error handling, exceptions, types of exceptions, coding exceptions, and summary. And I included some examples of exceptions and how to handle them. What is exception? Users have high expectations for the code we produce. Users will use our programs in unexpected ways. Due to design errors or coding errors, our programs may fail in unexpected ways during execution. It is our responsibility to produce quality code that does not fail unexpectedly. Consequently, we must design error handling into our programs. Errors and error handling. An error is any unexpected result obtained from a program during execution. Unhandled errors may manifest themselves as incorrect results or behavior, or as abnormal program termination. Errors should be handled by the programmer to prevent them from reaching the user. Errors and error handling. Some typical causes of errors. Memory error. For example, memory incorrectly allocated, memory leaks, or null pointer. File system errors. For example, disk is full, disk has been removed, etc. Network errors like network is down or URL does not exist. Calculation errors. For example, when we try to divide by 0. Array errors. Conversion errors, and can you think of some other errors that we and user may go through? Traditional error handling includes a return value or flag indicating either success, failure, or some other error condition. The calling method checks the return flag and takes appropriate action. Downsides of this. Programmer must remember to always check the return value and take appropriate action. This requires much code. Methods are harder to read, and something may get overlooked. Traditional error handling is used in programming languages like C, and it is used for almost all library functions. For example, fopen, which returns a valid file, or else no. When we create a global error handling routine and use some form of jump instructions to call this routine when an error occurs. Downside, jump instruction or goto are considered bad programming practice and are discouraged. Once you jump to the error routine, you cannot return to the point of origin and so must probably exit the program. Traditional error handling is used in other programming languages like C or Fortran, where it's recommended this method to programmers. Those who use this method will frequently adapt it to new languages like C++ or Java. Exceptions. A better error handling. Exceptions are a mechanism that provides the best of both worlds. Exceptions act similar to method return flags in that any method may raise an exception should it encounter an error. Exceptions act like global error methods in that the exception mechanism is built into Java. Exceptions are handled at many levels in a program, locally or globally. Exceptions, what are they? An exception is a representation of an error, condition, or situation that is not the expected result of a method. Exceptions are built into the Java language and are available to all program code. Exceptions isolate the code that deals with the error condition from regular program logic. How are they used? Exceptions fall into two categories: checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. Checked exceptions are inherited from the core Java class exception. They represent exceptions that are frequently considered non-fatal to program execution. Checked exceptions must be handled in your code or passed to parent classes for handling. How are they used? Unchecked exceptions represent error conditions that are considered fatal to program execution. You do not have to do anything with an unchecked exception. Your program will terminate with an appropriate error message. Checked exceptions include errors such as array index out of bounds, file not found, and number format conversion. Unchecked exceptions include errors such as no pointer. And here we have an example of checked exceptions. We have an array that is for that has 4 places in it, and we know that it starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, and so when we try to call place 4, we don't have place 4, and this is going to raise an error array index out of bounds, and it is that index 4 is out of bounds for length 4. If we, for example, asked for 3, it would have given us the record that is on place 3. For example, if it was 6, we would have had 6 in the console. And here we have example for unchecked exception. We have a string str that has value no, and when we try to get its length, give us no pointer exception because it doesn't have length. It doesn't have length 1, 2, it has length 0, and we can use this function if our string is no. How do you handle exceptions? Exception handling is accomplished through the try-catch mechanism or by a throws clause in the method declaration. For any code that throws a checked exception, you can decide to handle the exception yourself or pass the exception up the chain. And as we have seen, here is the try, here is the catch. So we have the try that receives some code. In our case, it's a system out print that will try to do what it's given. For example, in this case, it is supposed to give us the length of str. And catch is playing the role of a police officer, for example, who is trying to catch the bad guys of exceptions. And if this was false, and this was not no but was, for example, A, B, C, it would have given us 3, but because if it was not false, but if it was true and our string had length, it would have given us 3, but because it is false, the catch catches it and receives the output of the exception in exception E and throws it in here. For any code, yes, I over here. How do you handle exceptions? To handle the exception, you write a try-catch block. To pass the exception of the chain, you declare throws clause in your method or class declaration. If the method contains code that may cause a checked exception, you must handle the exception or pass the exception to the parent class. Remember, every class has object as the ultimate parent. Try-catch mechanism. Wherever your code may trigger an exception, the normal code logic is placed inside a block of code, starting with the try keyword. After the try block, the code to handle the exception should it arise is placed in a block of code starting with the catch keyword. You may also write an optional finally block. This block contains code that is always executed either after the try block code or after the catch block code. Finally, blocks can be used for operations that must happen no matter what. For example, cleanup operations such as closing a file. And this is how a try-catch code looks. As in the examples, you have try, you have catch with exception E. Exception E is the exception that may occur. Here is the executable code, and this is the exception handling code. Passing the exception. In any method that might throw an exception, you may declare the method as throws that exception and thus avoid handling the exception yourself. Public void my method throws IO exception, normal code with some IO, and IO is input output. This is an input output exception, and here we have some input output exception in which we have some code that tries to read, that is code in the main, this in the main, and all checked exceptions have class exception as a parent class. You can use the actual exception class or the parent class when referring to an exception. And these are the two types of exceptions. Regular exception, input-output exception, and this is the try-catch exception, try-catch block for both. As you can see, the exception only is with exception E, and with IO exception is IO exception IOE. E stands for exception and IOE stands for IOE exceptions. Of course, you can use some other letters like A, B, C, D. It is made like this, E and IOE, so it can be easier for reading from other people, checking your code, and yes. Exceptions are a powerful error handling mechanism. Exceptions in Java are built into the language, and exceptions can be handled by the programmer through try-catch blocks or handled by the Java environment by throws. And this is the more important stuff that you should remember from this presentation. I hope you liked it. These are my resources, and if you have any questions, you can ask them.